started. We have some questions from our followers, and one of the questions that came first was, what what was the catalyst? This seems to be a passion project for you. What was the catalyst for you to create the Oasis with your colleagues?
Super, great. Well, first, let me also take the opportunity to thank everybody for joining in. I apologize for my voice. I've got a bit of a cold still, so but we didn't want to reschedule. So here I am. You just get me sort of raw and real today. So why the Oasis? Well, when I started working on this would take us back to about 1996. The research that I was interested in at the time was to try to understand whether therapy helped, whether therapy for people who stutter made a difference in their lives. And of course, there had been plenty of research on treatment efficacy before then. But much of that research was focused on, does therapy change how much a person appears to stutter? It was all focused on the appearance of speech disruptions. And I wanted to ask a bigger question. I wanted to ask, does therapy make a real difference in people's lives? And so I thought, okay, great. If we're going to ask about does therapy work, we've got to define what does it mean to say that therapy works. And we rapidly learned that what works for one person is something different than what works for another person. One person's definition of success is different from another person's definition of success. And this is true about everything, not just stuttering, of course. And it turned out that we didn't really have a way of describing that, of capturing the broad range of different individualized outcomes that people who stutter might want from their therapy. So that led me into work trying to define what stuttering is in terms of a life experience. I don't mean in terms of the speech part. Plenty of people have written about that. But I wanted to understand the life experience of stuttering, and I wanted to understand it not from the perspective of observers, but from the perspective of people who stutter. And so that led to work on understanding the international classification. Today, we use the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health, or ICF. But back then, it was the previous version, the International Classification of Impairments, Disabilities, and Handicaps. And I used that as a way of conceptualizing stuttering and of providing a framework for describing life experience. And that's what became the Oasis, is what is the overall experience of stuttering. And what I wanted was a tool that could be used to capture individual experiences, to look at changes that people might experience during therapy. So something that could be done before therapy and after therapy. And something that could be used regardless of a person's views about stuttering. As you know, people have different opinions about stuttering. Well, I didn't want one that was only about stuttering from a psychological or counseling perspective, or only from a motor perspective. I wanted to develop something that could be used across the board. So working with my friend and colleague, Dr. Bob Kweisel, we started putting together portions of questionnaires to address different aspects of the stuttering experience. And through a process of testing and development that lasted many years, we came up with what ultimately became called the Oasis. And that is an assessment that's based on a theoretical framework for describing the entire experience of stuttering, that is individualized and can be used to assess whether therapy helps somebody based on their own unique goals.
I love the way you explained it, and of course you always weave in the ICF, because that's such an important part of everything we do when we write and when we talk. And so that may be a great lead in to another question from one of our followers. How is the Oasis different from the other assessments that the traditional ones that people really know about?
You bet. It was designed to be quite different as it could be. The most common assessment that people tend to use is a severity measure. The most well-known one is the Stuttering Severity Instrument, of course. The SSI, Stuttering Severity Instrument, is based on what a listener hears or sees about a person's speech behavior. It doesn't tell you anything about their emotions, doesn't tell you anything about their communication, doesn't tell you anything about the impact of stuttering, and it's not designed to. I'm not criticizing it for that reason. That's just not what it's for. But the key about the SSI is that it focuses on what a listener can perceive. One of the biggest differences between the SSI and the OASIS then is that the OASIS is focused on what the speaker perceives, how the speaker lives their life. And yes, it's also different in that it assesses impact rather than behavior. Absolutely, that's the fundamental distinction in what we're looking at. But the real shift is that we're asking the person about their life experience. And that is different from the common severity measures. It's not the first one to do that, though. There have been many other tools that have asked people who stutter about parts of their experience, their emotions, perhaps, their embarrassment or anxiety, or their self-efficacy, individual aspects of the broad experience. My goal with the OASIS was to develop something that would talk about the entire lived experience. And it's got multiple parts to do that. A little bit about the speaker's perception of their speech. Not a lot, because doing that is another project. Understanding the severity of stuttering from a speaker's perspective, that's a current project that we're working on that's completely separate. And Nina and I will tell you about that another time. But then the speaker's reactions, their feelings, their behaviors, their thoughts about stuttering. That's been done in some ways before. This OASIS is more comprehensive. Then for the first time, functional communication difficulties. How much trouble do they have, not in stuttering, just in communicating? Are they able to say what they want to say, do what they want to do across key social, key work or educational environments, key personal environments? And then impact of stuttering on quality of life. The OASIS is still the only stuttering specific quality of life instrument in the field. Of course, quality of life has been studied in stuttering using generic quality of life instruments, but those don't reflect the speech-related impact of stuttering, and that's the part that, of course, we're most interested in. When you look at a domain-specific, that is a speech-related measure, that's where you see impact on quality of life. So the OASIS is different from other tools in its focus, its perspective, and its breadth.
Excellent. We have another question. For those of you that are, I see people joining us a little at a time. For those of you who have just joined, if you have a question about the OASIS, you can DM us on at Stuttering Therapy Resources, and you can also let us know, yes, in in the chat as well, and we'll try to field as many as we can. Here's another question, Scott. Could the OASIS be used? This is an interesting one. I thought this was pretty perceptive. Could the OASIS be used on non-stuttering? Okay, for people who don't stutter, for attitudes about their general communication?
It is indeed a great question, and many, many people have been interested in this over the years. And the answer is absolutely yes. But it has to be adapted a little bit. So let me tell you some examples of how we've been doing that. First of all, for the population of people who clutter, okay, so people who don't stutter, but they have a different diagnosis, we have a version of the OASIS that is specifically for people who clutter, OASIC, and that is being developed in conjunction with Dr. Kathy Scaler-Scott. But that's another clinical population. What the question is really about is, what about people who don't have a clinical diagnosis or something else? What about people with speech sound issues? What about people with autism? And the answer is, again, yes, this has been done, but we do some adaptations. First of all, for people who don't have a diagnosis and we just want to know how do people in general feel about their speaking abilities, we have a version of the Oasis that's available through a research license that is the overall assessment. They'll start this way: the overall assessment of the speaker's experience of speaking ability, or the Oasis SA or OASA. I don't know how to pronounce that one. But this one, it replaces stuttering in the assessment with an assessment of how people think, act, and feel related to their speaking ability in general. This one has been applied to clinical populations and also to the general public. And it provides a nice counterpoint for comparing to people who stutter or to people who have other diagnoses. You can also adapt that. We have adapted that in research to other populations. To do this, don't just take the existing Oasis that you already have and scratch out the word stutter and write in the word speech sounds or whatever. Contact us and we'll help you do it. We do it through a license agreement so that you've got our support and so that the adaptation is done in the right way. Because it's not as simple as simply replacing the word stutter with something else. Some of the issues may be similar in other conditions. Some of them are certainly not. And so we've developed a bit of experience over the years in how to adapt this for different groups. But it can absolutely be done. Just reach out to us either through our Instagram, it's at Stuttering Therapy Resources, DM us, or you can email us. We're info@stutteringtherapyresources.com. And then we can help you through that and describe how that's done.
Thank you, Scott. We've got we have a couple of comments. Thank you for your comments. Those of you who just made some comments, thank you for there's two more questions that came in. I don't know if we'll have time to address both of those. But again, I said at the beginning, if you have questions, we'll either do another one or that may be rolled into something else. And make certain that you remember to put us on your notifications list. Make sure that you ask for notifications be sent to you when we go live, because we are scheduling out some lives especially over the beginning of the Northern Hemisphere's back to school world.
Right now, catching up.
Re-administered. How
Yes.
often
How
can it
often
be
can it be
re-administered?
re-administered? Great. When we did the original evaluation, we tested that it was stable across a 2-week period. So we knew that it was okay to administer at 2 weeks. Since then, people have administered it on a 1-week period, and it's still stable in the absence of any changes. And we even have a research study in which it was administered daily, showing that it was stable. So if you need to, this might be a lot for depending upon the client, but you can legitimately and validly administer it one day after the next. And in doing that, you could demonstrate stability of a person's attitudes and experiences with stuttering. Or if you feel like you weren't getting good data for whatever reason from a speaker, you can just do it again. There's no problem. Or it means that if you've had somebody go to a weekend intensive therapy approach, you could do it Friday and you can do it Monday. And the Oasis will be stable, meaning that any changes you see would be the result or associated with, at the very least, associated with the treatment. So you can do it basically as often as you need to.
Wonderful. Great answer. Great answer. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and try to get the two questions that came in from one of our listeners right now. Can you send it home with a client?
Absolutely. I do it all the time. Because it does take about 15 minutes for people to fill out. It's not a long time, but when people are looking for things to complain about, I mean, some of our colleagues who want people to use other tools, they might say, oh, it takes so long. There's somebody out there who's saying it takes an hour. That person is not doing it right. It takes 15 minutes, maybe 20. Okay, maybe 20. But you know what? Our time is tight. And if you have a 20-minute session, You can't spend 20 minutes just doing that, okay? So it is absolutely fine to send it home. I do it all the time. I mail them out to people. I give them to clients. They take them home. They fill them out. They bring them back. It is completely legitimate to do so.
And if I could do some problem solving as well, I'm going to just give, if that's okay, Scott, I'm going to give my
Please.
little spiel on this. Um, Number one, especially in the public schools, when you have a student, and if you're in a group or however you're doing your sessions, the child can just fill out section 1 or section 1 and 2 on one day, and then the next section 3 or 4. And the reason I try to hold on to it, especially with children, is because I don't want other people's ideas to become part of their answers. If someone is looking over the shoulder or might say, "Oh, I don't think that's right. I think you have much more impact," you know. And so if I do send it home, if I have to, I will say, "This is your information. Nobody else in the room, nobody else. If you have a question, you're just going to wait and bring it back to me." Because we want to make sure there's no other voices in this chorus. We'll get information from your teachers and your caregivers another time in another way.
We
But
have other ways of
just
doing that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
be
exactly.
really careful on that. So if
Great.
that's helpful, yeah.
Fantastic.
Um,
Very good.
Great. And the last actual question is, what about those mixed responses? In one section where they give maybe a higher rating, and another section they give a lower rating to almost the same idea.
Yeah. So this is a terrific question. So there's a challenge anytime you are doing self-report data. And it's a challenge that can't really be entirely overcome. And that is that people can write whatever they want. I mean, that's what we want them to do. We want them to express their thoughts. And if you've got a good rapport with your client, if your student knows why you're seeking the information, if they're comfortable enough with you, we've found that for the most part, people are going to give you good data. Not always, though. What if they don't want the world to know just how bad they're feeling about their stuttering? What if they know that they're really struggling, but they also know that if they tell you that, they're going to go to therapy and they don't want to go to therapy anymore? What if any host of things in which the client wants to show you something that isn't reflecting their reality? Well, that's going to happen no matter what the instrument is. But that's okay for two reasons. One is that tells you something in and of itself. So when you see those discrepancies, and you can pick up on them because you see the client, you know the child, you know the student, and if they say, "Oh, everything's fine, I'm so happy," and and you can tell they're not, well, that opens up a great opportunity for discussion. And so I use those discrepancies to help me understand the situation better. And what I typically do is I go through the items with my students after they fill it out. I go through it with them and I'll say, "Oh yeah, you marked a 3 here. All right, now 3 is in the middle. So let's think just a little bit. Is it more a 2 or is it more a 4? Or you marked a 1 here saying that you're not at all bothered by that. And boy, would that be lovely. But I got to challenge you on that a little bit once we have rapport. I got to challenge you a little bit about that. What do you think about this?" And they'll say, "Oh yeah, maybe it's more of a 4, right?" So look for those discrepancies. They give you a therapeutic opening. The second thing is the test is designed to handle this, right? There is overlap in the items and it's intentional. There is redundancy in the items and it's intentional. So sometimes you can see where there is maybe a student has responded with a bunch of 1s in one section, but there's that 1 5 out there and you think the 5 is really the one telling the story. Well, then you can come back and talk about it with them and work that through. And it opens up the opportunity for discussion, it opens up therapy, basically. So although the Oasis is an assessment tool, I often use it more as a therapeutic tool by going through it with them. Now, if a student is determined to present something that isn't an accurate picture of their experiences, no amount of testing is going to be able to catch them. But that, again, in and of itself, it tells you something. And that opens up an opportunity for discussion. And just like any other tool, if your clinical intuition tells you you're not getting accurate representative data, you simply write about that in the report. Or we talked about readministering. You readminister it after you've built a bit more rapport, after the student trusts you a little bit more, after the student understands the purpose of the test, after the student understands that there's no negativity or penalty associated with having a higher score. There's nothing to pass here. Well, then this can help you get better data. Use that clinical judgment because it'll serve you well, and recognize the limitations of any self-report measure.
Wonderful. So that's the end of the questions. We'll turn this, we'll take the glitches out when we go to post it, and it'll turn back into a 20-minute, 20-minute live. I want to make certain that everyone knows, number one, share with your colleagues our social media outlets, and make sure that, you know, people that you like would probably like to be with us sometimes. Put on your notifications, and always watch our social media stories for any time that I'll pop one out and say, hey, do you have any questions about this? We're going to do a live upcoming. Of course, you can DM us, get us at info@Stuttering Therapy Resources, get to our website. And Scott has a lovely, video on our website about why the Oasis, about more about the Oasis. If maybe an administrator wants to know more about it, just go to our website, look at the Oasis page, and just drill down, because all of the information is there. We want to
And
thank everyone for joining.
I see some people I'd like to say hi to, but
Oh,
at this point
sure.
I'm afraid to touch the phone. So I was going to type a hello, but I don't want to mess anything up. So thank you, my dear friends who've joined in as well. It's so nice to have you join us. Thanks.
Yeah.